Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go in, I'm going to do it kind of the other way around. I'm going to create a generic material. So I'm going to call this, it'd be trailer generic or generic paint or something like that. And then I'm going to map this with a bitmap. And let's say all formats. One of the funny thing about, actually annoying thing about 3D Studio is that whatever the last type of image that you picked, it defaults to files of that type. So you go, where's my files? You always have to come in here and click all formats. It's actually kind of obnoxious. But at any rate, so say, okay, well, there's a paint texture. And the cool thing about 3D Studio, though, makes up for that annoying thing, is that you have a really great preview in here. You can preview it on a ball. Okay, so you can rotate around. It'll make a nice rendered preview for it. You can preview on if you click over here, as a little flyout that'll let you preview on a cylinder, let you preview on a box. So you can actually do a lot of materials work in here. Let's go back to cylinder, or excuse me, sphere. Kind of it's the best one for visualizing what some specs look like and stuff on it. So if we look at this thing, I mean, I love this. I love it. I wish other 3D apps had this, because it really does help. You kind of get a sense of what your material is looking like. So I choose to show the map in the viewport. I'll know that I want that a little later. And then go down to maps, and I'm going to do that copy to bump thing. That's a nice, with an instance, that's a nice quick way to get a bump map. Now, it's not always going to work. There's a lot of cases in which you are going to have to use a tailored specific bump map. A lot of cases, but for this, that's going to work out pretty good. So now we can get a sense of what that looks like bumpier. Okay, and let's see what else. Well, if I want it to be, sort of painty, I'll take up the speck level. So now you can see what that's kind of doing, giving a little bit of shine. Specularity is the shininess of the thing, and so specular level is how much, and then glossiness is how broad it is. So you can have something that's really, really glossy, and you can see it kind of, the edges of the bump get highlighted as well. So that's good. Now, if we wanted to do this right, we're probably going to want to adjust this a little bit, see how it's shiny inside where it's cracked, where it's sort of scraped off as well. Maybe we don't want that. So we're going to need another map. Now, we could probably use a copy of that same map, but if you put a copy of that same map into specular level, for example, then since the luminosity of this map is fairly equal, this isn't that much darker, we need to do one of two things. We can make a separate maps in Photoshop. So if we go to Photoshop and we have this map open, we can go and if we look at the levels of this thing, actually first of all, let's make it black and white. So we can either go hue saturation, Control U, or you can go to image adjustments, desaturate. That'll take all the color information out. And if you go to image adjustments, levels, then what you can do is you can make this thing a lot more contrasty. You can also use these little eyedroppers here. So you can click this eyedropper. This will set the black point. And then this will set the white point. So you make that a lot more contrasty that way. So now we have black and white where that thing is, where in those areas where we don't want it to be shiny. So we can save this under images here. That's fine. Trailer paint. I'm going to call this trailer paint spec because it's a spec map. Hit OK, and we'll minimize Photoshop there. And let's see. So we have our spec map. We're going to put it into spec level. We're going to pick a bitmap, and we're going to pick that. So that was it. Paint spec right there. So now what it's doing is it's not letting it be shiny in those bits where it's rubbed off, and that'll give us a way more sort of realistic result. So I think that's a little bit too shiny overall. So I can take if I take spec level down to 0 here, it's a little bit weird the way 3D Studio works. The best way to do this is to set the spec level to 0, and then you can dial it down this map. So as you're dialing this map down, now your spec level is going to drop the amount of it. But if we had spec level set to something high here, that would overtake it. So the best thing to do is set the spec level to 0, and then adjust the amount that this map is influencing right here. So I'm going to come over here and we'll drop that spec level down like that. I'm going to come back up here, and the glossiness, we're going to let it be not quite so shiny. Alright, so good. Now we're going to I'm going to pick just a couple of things that feel like that generic thing can be assigned to. So I'm going to take these two pieces and click the Assign Material button and take a look, see what we got. Okay, fair enough. That's good enough for now. Maybe we want to adjust a little bit. Looks like it's getting a little bit stretched here, but that's okay. And maybe that's a little too, tore up there. It's a little stretched there too, so we'll take a look at that. What we can do is we can close this and we can turn on edged faces again. So I'm going to pick that little guy, and I'm going to add another modifier here. So edit poly, and I'm going to pick faces. There we go. And what I can do is again add this UVW map modifier. And here what I'll do is I'll say, okay, go and do it along Y, along X. That's the right one. Let's say I will hit the fit button, and that gives me what I had before, because it was about right. But what I'm looking to correct here is that stretch. Now there's a couple of places that I can correct that stretch actually. One of the places is in the bitmap itself. The bitmap itself has this parameter called tiling, in which I can set it to tile in UNV, so I can just move these around. So tiling, let's set this to 1 and 1.2. I can tile it in one direction or another, and so I can sort of, if it's a tiling texture map, I can have it repeat a number of times, 2.5 times in this case, which takes care of some of the stretching, but it also makes it repeat other places that maybe I don't want it to repeat, like here, for example. This is especially, it's especially poor to do this in a material that's a generic material like this. It's something applied to several things. You don't want to, in order to fix one thing, you don't want to break another thing, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to leave tiling to 1 and 1 here in the bitmap itself, and what we'll do is we'll increase the tiling in this particular UV mapping coordinate. So what I can do is just increase V tile here and move this around until it's not quite so stretched out anymore. And that way I haven't affected any of the other things that material is assigned to, or that texture is assigned to. Now I actually don't really like how chewed up that thing is, so I'm going to go into Photoshop and I'm going to take out some of these little bits. You got this already got some noise here, and it's going to want to give the eye a rest someplace. So go into Photoshop, and it's actually really easy to do. If you take the stamp tool, the clone stamp tool, and you turn off aligned, then you can pick an area, and when you do that, it's always going to clone from that area that you've just picked. So we take out some of this. We can leave in the little things. I just kind of want to get rid of some of this big stuff. It's just a little bit too, over the top with how chewed up it is. So now I'm going to take this new map and map it to those bits where I don't need quite as much, chippedness. So in order to do that, I'll get the material editor up here, and what I'll do is I'll take this material and copy it. But I can't do that right now because I'm in rotate mode, so I'm going to right click and say drag copy rather than drag rotate. So I drag copy, and when I drag it, I can copy it over to here. Now, it's kind of important to, when you do that, you'll see generic paint, and then you'll see generic paint. Not a bad idea to kind of rename this and call it, generic paint less hacked. Because what's going to happen is if I don't do that and I leave it this way and I change it, so I'm going to change this and pick trailer paint less hacked, right? So if I do that, then I have that new material here, and then if I try to take this piece and apply this with the assigned material, it's going to ask me replace it or rename it. If I select replace, what it's going to do is going to replace everything that had this material assigned to it with that material, and that's not what I want to do. You can rename that material in this dialog box, but it's not a bad idea to do it beforehand. But at any rate, either way, then it'll rename that material for you, so you can have you can have one of each, and that's a little bit better. It's not quite so ridiculously scratched up there.